So I think that this topic is super important because as investors, valuation is probably the number one thing that you need to understand in your business, right? You need to understand your numbers across the board, but where a lot of investors drop the ball is predicting what they're going to get on the resale value because they purchased it without really understanding what it would appraise for. So Mike Scarpa, community member, owner of an appraisal company. He's been an appraiser for 7 years, been in the Bay Area for 15 years, and he's going to share a wealth of knowledge with us today about how to analyze these properties and how to come up with an, accurate or as close as you can be analysis of what your resale value is going to be on the property. So he services Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas, some parts of Hernando, Manatee, what am I missing? Sarasota, right? So if you guys need, if you have a property that doesn't have great comps or, you're really needing help with an appraisal, you do, personal appraisals as well, right, Mike?
Yeah, we do all sorts of consults for investors. So, whether you need a full report or you just need kind of an unbiased opinion, we're here to help. So.
Awesome. All right, perfect. All right, well, let's jump into it. What do you got for us today?
Sure. So, I wanted to kind of start in the basics, right? So, the appraisal form is not easy to read at all. So I'll go ahead and share that up on the screen. So I did do a mock appraisal. This is a property I actually own in Seminole Heights, in the process of selling it, supposed to close tomorrow, which would be nice. But a thing to know for everyone in the group that an appraiser can only talk to the client when you're going through this process, right? So I cannot share any information about a listing or a property I'm appraising with anyone other than the client. So typically the client is the bank, but in some cases it's also, investors or realtors or whoever kind of ordered it. So it's important if you do order an appraisal for private purposes that you set your intended users correctly, right? So whoever's going to use that appraisal you want access to. So sometimes it's not the appraiser being a jerk that they don't want to talk to you. It's simply that we're not allowed to talk to you about, the specifics of an assignment. But starting at the beginning, right, is the form. So you'll notice, like, if you look at this form here, it's 25 pages, right, for an opinion of value. Does my opinion of value, need to be 25 pages? No, but in order for a bank to utilize this appraisal, it needs to hit certain areas and has to have certain comments in there. So I was going to kind of go over an overview of like the standard form, which is the 104 form. This is for residential single family lending purposes. And then when you're an investor, sometimes I'll utilize this general purpose form. So I just pulled this one up. A general purpose form is only 11 pages, right? It could be even shorter, just depending. So general purpose appraisal, anytime you're getting a appraisal done for non-lending work, it should be on this general purpose appraisal. If an appraiser is not using this form and they're using that 104 form that I just showed you, it's incorrect. There's a bunch of certifications in this form that have to do with lending. So you shouldn't be using that in the form. But basically what I try to do is to make it user friendly. So I make a table of contents, and typically your opinion of market value is going to be on the first page, because typically as an investor, as a realtor, someone buying a property, you don't really care about anything but the value. So that's just kind of the truth. So it's important to kind of find this in the report, but some appraisers will do this and give you a table of contents, which I think is helpful to the intended user of the report. So the first page is basics about what's going on with the property, the legal description. It's not really pertinent information unless there's something like, an issue with the appraisal report. The number one area you're going to want to look at is most likely going to be your comparables, which is the, second page down. That is the most important area, because you're going to say, well, what appraisal, what comps did they use for this appraisal? So we're going to hit on this more, but I figured I'd show it to you. So second page, these are your comparable sales, all right in here. And then if you scroll down, you have your opinion of value. So within the first 2 pages, you pretty much can see everything the appraiser has done. And then all of the rest of it is certifications, comments, cost approach, all of this kind of bureaucracy, if you will, for lending assignments. So focus on the 2 first pages, right? Look for your value opinion. If you agree with the value opinion, most of you will probably not read the rest of it. If you disagree with it, the second page, you'll look at is the comparables, and you'll start looking at adjustments as well. I think that's really important. On the general purpose form, it's very similar, where it looks different, but realistically it's the same, right? Once you get down to your second page, you have your comparable sales here, and then you look for your value, which is typically right here on the third page. Another thing you might want to know is who did your appraisal, right? Certain times you have no idea who came to the property, who did it. So the name is typically under the value opinion. So it's like my name, company name, whoever's going to sign the report. That's important also because you want to look at the person's license and you want to look at the person's address. Okay. So for instance, if you're having an appraisal done on your property in Tampa, and then the address of the person is, let's say, Ruskin or Sun City Center or Valrico, not that you're going to question their expertise, but you might question if there are some comps that were pulled in the improper direction. You might want to question, well, did they have the geographic competence to do this appraisal? Because sometimes what happens is when it's a bank appraisal, they are going to go with an AMC, appraisal management company. So the appraiser, if there's a middleman involved with the bank and the appraiser, and what that middleman does is they take part of the fee and they bid the assignment out to other appraisers that might bid lower and be further away. So that's something to keep in mind. Always look at who's doing the report, who's signing it, your value opinion, and the comps.
So I want to key in on this real quick, guys, because this is an area where I see either crappy appraisals or sellers losing value, right? So in Tampa, this is especially important because if you have appraisers that are coming, let's say from Hernando County, that's a very different market. And I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I always tell investors, from the real estate agent side of it is, appraisers are people, right? So they have their own sets of opinions and biases. So when I'm selling a property in Seminole Heights and the appraiser is coming up from Spring Hill, that is a problem for me. Like, I want to try to get in front of that, and I want a local Tampa appraiser to appraise my Tampa properties, because an appraiser that comes from the suburbs of Spring Hill, where it's all planned unit developments, they don't understand necessarily why a 100-year-old house in Seminole Heights is selling for $650,000 when their 4,000 square foot houses don't even cost $650,000, right? So you want a local appraiser, if at all possible, to be appraising, for the bank. You don't have a whole lot of control over this, but digging in up front to who the lender is and where they order appraisals from and asking them to make sure that they use a Tampa appraiser, getting in front of that is really important to trying not to have a low appraisal, in my opinion, especially for Tampa properties. So
yes,
sorry.
I agree.
Continue.
And the opposite, I agree, Keely. The opposite is in effect too. Like, for instance, I won't take appraisals I don't feel comfortable doing. I'm very comfortable now in Lakeland. I wasn't at first, but now I've done, a lot of appraisals there, so I understand the nuances of those neighborhoods. But in rural, right? So I've had appraisals in Dade City where I'm actually confident in Dade City because I like the area and I do research in that area. But if I'm appraising 10-acre farmland, it might be a lot different than an appraisal in the city. So you want to make sure that just because someone has 20 years of experience doesn't make them geographically competent. So you want to definitely check that out. An alarming thing too is desktop appraisals, where you have an appraiser in Orlando doing appraisals in Tampa, right? Because you know the value of your property and you've done all your research. So when it comes down to one person just to look at it, you want to make sure it's the right person, doing it. So that's important as well.
It's a lot easier, I feel like, too, to get in front of a bad appraisal rather than trying to argue a bad appraisal. Because a bank, from a lending perspective, once the buyer has had their appraisal, in order for that appraisal to be changed, you're having to ask that appraiser essentially to admit that his valuation was wrong, right? That he didn't pull the right comps. And it's really hard to get people to admit that. And if they won't do that, you're stuck with that value. And then at that point, the buyer would need to change lenders, which a lot of them are not willing to do. So you, as the seller, you get left with this decision of whether to move forward with this buyer and not make as much money, or go back to market, which has hurt your marketability, right? So getting in front of it, and to Mike's point, really, having your realtor, if you're listing with a realtor, contact the bank preemptively and make sure that you've got a local a local appraiser, or to your point, an appraiser that is competent in the area that they're working in.
Yes, definitely. It is very difficult to get a reconsideration of value unless something was, done completely incorrectly. But most of the time, you're basically challenging that person's license. So, most appraisers dig in when someone challenges them, and it doesn't usually go well. So, like you said, I like for someone to provide me the comps way before I come out, because when I come out to your property, I've already pulled the comps and I have to go take pictures of the comps. So if I'm driving an hour away and you give me the comps at the listing appointment, well, am I going to really drive back an hour if I missed one comp? Most appraisers probably would say no. And I'm going to say I did my research, and I think that these are more pertinent. So providing them via email, whenever I get contacted by an appraiser, say, hey, what's your email? I'd like to send you over a little email. You're not influencing value. You're just providing your due diligence, and you try to come across that. Another thing to keep in mind is, I'm a younger appraiser comparatively to most, right? So the majority of appraisers in their 60s, they've been doing it. They've been through a crash before. So you might be a little more open with me and we might be able to discuss a little bit more, but some of them may be a little bit less open and less communicative or hospitable, whatever you want to call it. So kind of threading the needle where you're not telling them their job, but at the same time, you are fighting for what you believe in to be true. And I think softly emailing them over is the best thing several days in advance. As soon as they call you, you need to get their email and email them the comps. You don't want to give them to the day of, because like I said, they're already going to go out and take pictures. Most likely, they're not going to drive back to that area to take.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you one more time just because I want to make sure you guys are catching like the key. There's a lot of information, but there are some key things. Like this is another jewel that he's giving in terms of making sure that you secure that value on the appraisal on the back end. So again, reiterating, anytime the appraiser reaches out to your realtor or you, if you're the realtor, should text back immediately. Or if you answer the call, right, say, hey, I was wondering if I could send you over some additional information and maybe some comps for your consideration. Do you have a good email address? And you keep it really simple, because to Mike's point, some of them are open, some of them are not. It's this like game of dancing with the appraiser to make sure you're not stepping on his toes and you're not being a know-it-all, but you're also making sure that you're advocating for your property. So you're sending over, hey, here's all of the ages of the major mechanicals. Here's information on the updates that I've done. Trying to give them as much information as possible to show all of the improvements that you've made and make your house look really good. And then also accompanying it with comps. But this is what Mike is going to teach us, is good comps, not just willy-nilly crap comps. We need to send them comps that support the price that we're asking for.
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was going next. So let's take a look at like a comp search area. Not everyone has access to MLS, and we'll talk about Zillow, how we can do that later. But for instance, I'm going to comp out this house in Seminole Heights. How far out do you go? Well, that just depends on the area, right? So city limits of Tampa, let's just put a circle out on the map here so you guys can take a look at it. City limits of Tampa, if you go a mile out, we're in Wellswood here, or we're in Belmont Heights here, right? So geographically, I'm not really too worried about the 1 mile radius. I'm more worried about similar neighborhoods. So if you know your areas, for instance, in Pinellas County or Hillsborough County, if you know your areas, you know what's comparable, right? So it's important that you comp it out comparatively. Look, my 1.5 miles goes into Riverside Heights. Is Riverside Heights the same as Seminole Heights? For most of you that understand that market, there's $1.9 million houses in Riverside Heights for really no good reason other than it's close to downtown Tampa. Seminole Heights is only a mile up, but it's a completely different market. There are no $2 million non-waterfront homes in Seminole Heights. So my 1.5 mile radius is a circle right now in MLS, but I like to make it sometimes a rectangle or a square. So what I'll do is I'll clear the shape, and then I will go ahead and draw a rectangle from what I think to be comparable, which would be MLK up and then slide down and across here. Now I'm writing 275 on both sides. That's just because I know there's a historical district on one side that's not on the other, and I want to compare it to another historical district. But for general rules, a mile to a mile and a half. Rural properties, you can go as far as 5 miles and explain. So like, for instance, if we were going to be out here in Brandon, Valrico, like we might go 3 miles if it's not a PUD, planned unit development house, and it's on acreage. So So you have more leeway, but it makes no sense when I have all of these sales to go any further than what I just pulled here, right? Someone might question that. So that's kind of important. Crossing major roadways, you have to understand most of the time you don't want to do that. For this particular property, there is a historical district right in this little pocket that is very similar to the historical district here and here. So when I pull comps, sometimes I do, keep that in mind when I do cross major roadways. Ideally, we'd want to stay on either the east or the west side of a major roadway. MLK being a major roadway here, south would be Ybor Heights, and south over here would be Riverside Heights. So that would be a little bit different. Let's talk quickly about, I wanted to bring this up when you're pulling comps. So like I just did an analysis for an investor in North Hyde Park, Midtown. So like if you draw a rectangle from north of Kennedy, south of 275, like this is the market. Well, you also need to keep in mind school districts. So everyone, that's investing in Tampa, let's take a look at like what I pulled up here, right? So we have a rectangle where we have North Hyde Park, but I'm sure Keely's aware. There is a school district border that runs within here that has kind of a wonky layout. So I'll pull it up, for instance. So here's the Plant High School District. It's a coveted district in Tampa. So when you're pulling comps, an appraiser should be geographically competent and understand that this little pocket right here that is not in the Plant High School District will not have the same ARV as the ones that are below that. So like that's a big sticking point. In Pinellas County, it's similar, kind of all over Tampa. In North, for instance, in like Steinbrenner District in Odessa versus Sickles or Gaither, that is a big factor in your ARV values. So that's something to keep in mind. Keely, do you want to jump in here?
I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. So the reason for that, and because often there's investors that either don't have kids yet or their kids are older, right? And so they're not necessarily concerned about school zone. I feel like this is a big one that goes over the heads of people who are evaluating properties, right? Because you would think, okay, South Tampa, I need to stay, in this geographic location. But buyers will pay a premium to live in that Plant High school zone, right? And so Mike, I know on another call that we did on the school lunch, networking last week, you were talking about an appraisal that you did where at that Euclid boundary, it changed a couple $100,000, right? So you're talking about massive property value adjustment for being within a certain school zone versus not being within a certain school zone, right? And so what can happen is, let's say that you purchased a property, in that North Hyde Park area that he just showed that's not in the Plant school zone, but you're pulling all comps and looking at all comps that are within Plant High School. Well, guess what? Your property doesn't fetch that same premium because it's not within that Plant High school zone. So if you're purchasing a property, you can go into one of the good places to search is you can literally Google like Hillsborough County School Board or Pinellas County School Board, and they have a map locator, and you can look up the school zone for the property address. And if it's in an A school zone, that's probably a great buy. Like that's a good one to buy. But you want to kind of incorporate that, I think, into your analysis for sure, making sure that you understand those boundaries for those A-rated school zones.
Yeah, so like the line that Keely's talking about is Euclid down here. So one side of the street here is Plant and one side's Robinson. We had an investor that I did like a consult for where they fully redid a property on a canal, and we're trying to use the comps across the street that were in the Plant district versus they're in the Robinson district. They didn't know. And the ARV, I mean, talking a couple $100,000 off. So not a good day for that investor. So it's important when you're just because you hear, Euclid, you think, oh, Plant, perfect, I'm in. But it's not how it works. There's borders. These borders also move. So whenever you're investing in a property, it's important to look at them every time you do it. So like, for instance, Seminole Heights is not a big one, but like, Seminole Heights Elementary is a lot better of an elementary school than the one that I'm zoned for where my kids would go, which is Foster on 22nd. So like that's a big, selling feature in Seminole Heights that you can send your kids to the elementary school and you don't have to worry about private school. So definitely school zone, definitely crossing major roadways, rivers, right? So like if we go back to this map and we go back to Seminole Heights, like Sulphur Springs has a different ARV than Seminole Heights does. All that really is the crossing is a river. So it's important. You don't want to just pull a comp from across the river and say, oh, that's good. It's, it's real close. We had family that stayed in Tampa who just looked like it was a mile, but it was a mile like here, and they stayed at a hotel like right off of Bush Boulevard. Like it's just different. It's just a different area, right? So you want to know your areas, and really, we talked about this last time too. Is like find your niche and really get comfortable in that niche, so you know what you're buying and you understand it. From an appraisal perspective, we want to make sure we're looking at all this stuff prior to pulling comps. So that's kind of where we're at with that. The next thing on my list is fixed features. So like the appraisal that we're looking at right now is a Seminole Heights bungalow. The as repaired or per the scope of work, it's going to be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,120 square feet. It has a detached 2-car garage, right? So some features that really scream out at me when you're comping an old bungalow is that you should be utilizing old bungalows as comparables. So if you're putting in anything that's built in 2020 for a 1918 house, I think that is totally off base. Like if there was nothing available, yes, maybe we could do that and make some severe adjustments. But you want to comp it with similar items. So like what I try to do is if it's built in 1920 or 1930, I go from 1900 to like 1960. And if I have nothing, then I will expand. But let's start there, right? Even 1960 is pushing it because a lot of 1960 houses are block. And these are all wood
Let's talk
frame.
about like a South Tampa house, talking about kind of age variance, like a
Cool.
1980s South Tampa house. What age variance are you using for maybe a
Yeah,
newer
so
pitch home?
1980s is tricky. So I look at ranches from the 60s and I'd go all the way to like 2010. And I preferably would not like to use the 2010s because it's just a different quality, different style, a different build. But if I have to, I will. But the sweet spot I think is like 1995 to like 1970 would be like a perfect sweet spot. As far as gross living area, also called GLA, you want to try to stay 25% of the GLA. So like if you have a 1,900 square foot house, you would times it by 25% and you'd go plus or minus that. An appraiser will
5% smaller or 25% larger within that range. So if it's a 2,000 square foot house, right, you're taking 250 off and adding 250. So you're between what, like 1,750 and 2,250 should be the square footage of homes that you're looking at as comparable to your property.
correct, yes. So we talk about the age and then we talk about the gross living area. I think those are the two like important factors. Style is not a huge factor unless you're in a historical district like this house. So if you're looking at it like, Hyde Park, for instance, bungalows and, craftsmen and Cape Cods, like those drive prices because they're so unique. When you're in West Chase, like a 2-story versus a 1-story, may have some impact on value, but most of the time, if it's modern or farmhouse or, whatever it might be, craftsman, it's all pretty much similar. It's the stucco box majority of the time. So that doesn't really drive price. Like that one you guys did up in Van Dyke Farms, those are all pretty similar in style. Whether one has a loft or doesn't, it's not really a huge impact on value.
Right.
Site size. So if we look here at the line site size, that is going to be how big your lot is. You'll notice that I put zeros next to all of the comps because anything within a couple thousand square feet to me is pretty similar, unless we're looking at like in Ybor, for instance. Some of them are like 3,000, 4,000 square foot lots versus an 8,000 square foot lot. Like we make adjustments for that. It's called surplus land, and that means you can't split it off. So it's extra land that you have. Excess land would be like, okay, you have an additional lot and we need to value that lot and you could sell it off, in the future. So when you look at this, if your appraiser made some, for a half acre versus an acre, that would be a good indication of making an adjustment. For Seminole Heights, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot and another lot's 9,000 square feet, I might look at it and make an adjustment for surplus land. It will not be equivalent to what the house or the lot would sell for by itself divided by a certain, price point. It's going to be lower because it's only surplus land. It's extra yard space, basically.
And I think one thing too is like the surplus land adjustment can sometimes be really big. Like a lot of times I'll see if it like a 1/4 acre versus a half acre, but the subject property is on a 1/4 acre and they're trying to get the same price as the guy on a half acre, you know, that can be a big adjustment depending on the area. You can be, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in adjustment just on the lot size.
Definitely. Certain communities drive, that price point, right? So for city living, like, is 1,000 square foot really gonna, increase the value of your site size? Realistically, not. Does a corner impact the value? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But yes, when you get out to, more rural or more suburban, like if you have a 20,000 square foot lot versus a little 7,000 interior lot, that's, a pretty big adjustment. So that's kind of something we should look at too. So whenever you're running comps, you want to look at site size, you want to look at your gross living area, and then you want to look at your features. So like, for instance, this house has a covered porch and it has a 2-car garage. So in Seminole Heights, a garage is definitely a feature that adds value because it could be used multiple ways. It could be a legal ADU down the road. It could just be a workout room. It could be to park your cars. Like, there's options, and some of these properties don't have that option. So it's a nice luxury to have. So I adjusted it, there for that. But when you're picking your comps, you want to focus in on those items. Another item to focus in on as an appraiser, if you have a pool home, my first thing to do is pull pool homes only. If I have no comps with pools and I have to use non-pool homes, I will, but I truly would prefer to use pool homes. So if you have an in-ground pool and you're, flipping a house in Pinellas County, I'm most likely going to pull all pool homes. Even if they're a little bit older in time, I can make an adjustment for that versus making an adjustment for a pool. Because I feel like that amenity really drives buyers, right? People are looking for either pool homes or they're not. It's not like you're just walking up to a house and say, well, this got a pool. It's great. It's usually you're looking for the pool. So I think that impacts value, pretty greatly. I can't give you like an all over adjustment for a pool, but the majority that I see in Tampa range from 15 to 60,000. So just depending where you are, sometimes the adjustments on an appraisal would be 15 to 60,000. We also adjust for the screened porch. Does it have an outdoor kitchen? Does it have paper patio? Like the quality of the actual pool, how big the pool is. So that all factors into the adjustment. The biggest ones I see are 15 to 60,000. Sometimes when you list a property, it jumps your price way bigger than that 60,000. But when you look at it just on the appraisal, just on that specific item, it might be 15 to 60,000. I've done them upwards of 125,000 before in like a really high end community. So they really vary, and someone should not just tell you, oh yeah, it's 20,000 no matter what. Like, it should vary based on the market data in that neighborhood. So that's important to look at as well.
So real quick, I just want to make sure that everybody, in case there's anybody who's not at all familiar with comping or an appraisal, I just want to make sure that this is not going over everybody's head in terms of the actual adjustment conversation. So if you look at Mike's appraisal that he has pulled up, you have the subject property, right? And that's showing, hey, these are all of the key details of this subject property. And then each comp has those details, those same set of details specific to each property listed. And then the adjustments that we keep referring to are those numbers that you see under each comp. You'll see the characteristics, and then there's a second column where you'll see like plus $10,000, minus $5,000. And so what he's doing is the subject property is like, it is what it is, right? And so we're looking at the comps and we're adjusting the comps, adding value or taking away value for the specific characteristics of each comp. And so what that's doing is it's then adjusting kind of, I guess, the value of each of those comps, right, Mike, at the kind of at the base.
Yeah. And so kind of stepping back, if everyone looks at the top row, that's the actual sold price. So this one was 500, 500, 510, 515. This is an ARV appraisal. So like, this is an as repaired value. So we're saying that someone just dropped 120 grand on this little bungalow and basically brought it up to what's considered C2 condition. So let's take a look at that, because I was going to do that later, but I think it's a good conversation here. So whenever you go into an appraisal and you look for the definitions addendum, this will tell you all of the meanings of everything in the appraisal. So, and Keely did a good video on this. Condition is where there's most subjectivity when it comes to appraisals. So condition ratings are important. So if we go back to our comps, we look at majority of my comps are in C2 condition. One's in C3, and then I have another one in C3. Okay. None are in C1. C1 is the best. It's like a brand new house that was just constructed. So a 1918 bungalow will never be a C1 unless we go back to 1918. Okay. It could be a C2, but let's read the directions really quickly. So C1, the improvements have been recently constructed, have not been previously occupied. Not been previously occupied. So that means it's a brand new construction. Okay. So most of our flips, if you're doing $70,000 to $125,000 renovation on a property, you're doing the roof, you're doing the plumbing, the electrical, drywall, you're going to be in the C2 range. Improvements feature no deferred maintenance, little or no physical depreciation, no repairs, all building components. This is a good one though. Virtually all building components, not all of them, but virtually all of them are new or have been recently repaired, refinished, or rehabilitated. So C2. The majority of houses that I appraise in for banks in Tampa or St. Petersburg are C3, C4. So as we go down, they get worse and worse. C3, they're well maintained. C4, some deferred maintenance. C5 would be obvious deferred maintenance. This would be kind of how you're buying fix and flips. C6 would be like fire damage, hoarders, floors are falling apart. No one's going to lend on this unless it's a hard money lender. C5, that would be like maybe it was a hoarder house and, it's still working. There's plumbing working. The roof's not leaking. There's definitely some issues. A lender might lend on this. C4 is like, okay, we have some deferred maintenance, right? So someone's lived there for 60 years, but it's livable. It's in decent shape. It needs all the cosmetics. It needs a roof. It needs, so C4 and C3 are kind of the majority of where you'll see. So you'll see when I go on to my actual comparables, like my first comparable was renovated, but it was not done in the last year, like fully renovated. It didn't have brand new roof, brand new windows, brand new kitchen, brand new bathrooms. But over the last 6-7 years, they've renovated quite a bit of it, but obviously it's been lived in as well. So an appraiser could make these adjustments very subjectively. You could do depreciated cost of the item, and you could also do based on, like, let's say, well, they redid one bathroom, but they didn't do the other one. Well, a bathroom renovation is anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000, so we would move that up 10. Another thing that Keely touched on is you cannot change your subject property on an appraisal. So you're going to see all the comps change, but not the subject. So for instance, this is in C3 condition, so it is worse than my subject. So I need to add money to it to make it better. Okay. If it's better, then I need to take away money. So for instance, this one is 1,252 square feet. Well, mine's only 1,120, so I need to minus $15,000 off of that. I did a square footage adjustment based on only the square footage of the property. So that's kind of a misconception, right? Your sold price is $399 a square foot. Your adjustment was around $115, $120 a square foot. Okay. So you don't get the full value because we have to take out all of your amenities, like your covered porch, your garage. We have to take out your plumbing, your electrical, and then we have to take out all of the site value. So in Seminole Heights, this land could be worth $250,000. So you're not going to see a square footage adjustment this large on an appraisal because this is the totality of the property. So I think people misunderstand that, especially realtors. It's important. Your sale price per square foot encompasses everything to do with that property, not just that 1,120 of living space. Okay. So keep that in mind when you see your adjustments, they're a little bit different.
I think that's a huge point, because oftentimes I see investors who, when they go to list their property, if they don't understand upfront how this appraisal is going to work, right? And they'll say, well, the neighbor's house sold for 420 a square foot. And then they take 420 a square foot, times it by the square footage of their house, and boom, there's their list price. And that's not how it works, like whatsoever. All of these nuances of, the condition rating and the different features, and, there's a diminishing return on size, right? Like a property that's smaller typically sells for a higher price per square foot than maybe a larger property. So it's completely wrong to just multiply the square footage by, the price per square foot of a neighbor's house. You don't want to do that. You need to compensate for all of these factors.
Typically, like a little tidbit is it's around sometimes a third of this. So, if you see 387, your adjustment will probably be around 125, 130 per square foot. but that's not always the case, right? It's a case by case basis. Some of them are really low, some of them are really high. If you have a 7,000 square foot house, your price per square foot is going to be a lot different than an 1,100 square foot bungalow, right? So we're looking at a very small house in an area that is very popular within a historical district that's even more popular. So the price per square foot is significantly higher than the average of totality of Tampa, right? Yes. So another thing to think about is bedroom counts. And Keely wanted me to kind of touch on the standards for a bedroom. So in the state of Florida, the standard is a 70 square foot room. So it needs to be at least 70 square feet. It has to have 2 egresses. So your window and your door. You can't have a bedroom without windows. And then a closet is the building code, but in certain parts of historical areas, like for instance, I have a 4-bedroom house. Well, one of the bedrooms is tandem, but they're both very large rooms. And they're, when I had my appraisal done, I had 2 appraisals done in the last 6 months. Both appraisers used it as a bedroom. It doesn't have a closet. We have like an IKEA kind of stand-up closet. So I feel like the closet is a little bit of a leeway situation because, functionally you're going to use it as a bedroom or an office, a gym, whatever you're going to use it as. But definitely 70 square feet, 2 egresses. So you want to make sure you at least have a window and a door. That's really important.
So if you guys buy a house and it's got a 7 by 7 room, you're not going to get that as a bedroom on the appraisal. And so that, that can hurt you, right? So understanding what constitutes a bedroom is important because, you could get hit for not having that bedroom. Like now all of a sudden you have a 2-2 and, the comps are all 3-2. Well, guess what? You're getting a deduction because even though you have that small little room, it's not actually a bedroom per the appraiser.
Yes. So let's go to the appraiser website because that was my next kind of where we wanted to go. So Bob is our appraiser in Hillsborough County. So we're going to look at this property I'm looking at right now. So I type in the address and what I'm going to get at is square footage, functional obsolescences. So in a lot of older homes, especially in Hillsborough and Pinellas County, you'll find the sketch and you'll see enclosed porches, enclosed garages, finished areas that weren't original to the home. So like this one's pretty straightforward, right? We have a big box that's 1,120 square feet. And then you have a finished porch on the front of it. Well, that's a screen porch. So it's not an enclosed porch. But I want you guys to understand from an appraisal perspective and an investor perspective, right, that all square footage is not equal. Okay. So if your flow does not work, or you have a big giant enclosed porch off the back side of this property, it might not be worth the same as a flow or a functional, kind of, if you have to walk through a bedroom to get to another bedroom, that becomes a functional obsolescence. I see the big with enclosed garages, converting garage space. If you have to walk downstairs to go into the garage and it's kind of like an awkward layout and it's off the kitchen or something like that, like sometimes that might not get the same square footage adjustment as a gross living area, like that's more open concept or more functional in its use, right? I see a lot of people throwing in bathrooms all over the place and it's not done to the same quality as the rest of the house. Finishing enclosed porches is a big one. So like if we finish this enclosed porch, like let's not think that that's going to add a significant amount of value that we think it might, right? So it might add, a couple hundred square feet to the gross living area, but what can it really be used as, right? It's really just a mudroom entryway because you're walking into it. You're not gonna be able to add a bedroom, bathroom in the front of the house there. So keep that in mind. I appraise a lot of properties for investors that are buying things that, oh, we're going to enclose the garage, not a big deal. Like, well, okay, but like, how is that going to work out with where your bedroom, bathroom is? I appraised one where it's like 5 steps down. The city of Tampa would not label it as a bedroom. So even if you permitted it, they're just going to call it like a bonus room, like a kind of a den. So that's something to keep in mind, even if you have a bathroom in there. Ceiling height is another big one. So there are ANSI standards for measuring that all appraisers need to adhere to when we do bank loans. So on the front side, most of the time, it's easy to get the hard money lender to agree with you on your ARV because they want to make 12% and 2 points. But when you go to sell it on the back end, there's less leeway with a bank appraiser. So if you call Chase Bank, like they're going to pull out a laser measurer and check every ceiling height because I've had it happen to me on an investment property. So if it's not 7 feet, like it's not going to be counted as gross living area. It'll be counted as some sort of, finished space. just won't have as much value. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You know, your ceiling heights, your functionality of your kind of bedrooms is really important. And then Keely also wanted me to touch on like laundry rooms that aren't heated and cooled. So the best way to kind of get them included is to finish them just like the rest of the house. Same flooring, drywall, AC or heat. Like the main thing, believe it or not, in Florida to consider, you know, something is done in a workmanlike manner, or, you know, like the rest of the house, and it has to have a heat, permanent source of heat, not air conditioning. You don't need air conditioning, you need heat, which is kind of odd, but that's the rule. So if you have a little enclosed porch or a little laundry room, you need to make it functionally look like the rest of the house, and you need to run a duct to it. A plug in the wall one will not work. So like I had to go out to a house where they had a plug-in one. It's like that could just be unplugged. It's not included in the gross living area. So definitely want to make sure it is fully ducted, heated, cooled, and it looks like the rest of the house. Steps are also awkward, and the sliding glass door, like take the sliding glass door out and make it feel as a part of the house. So that way, when you go to get your appraisal, there's no question about it. It is part of the house. Mm-hmm.
And I think
Okay.
that works for both guys, like the marketability of the house as well as the appraisal, right? So as an investor, when you're going in and you're sizing up a house to see if it's a deal that works, you need to do that. A lot of investors get excited. They like the neighborhood. They like the house. They like the number. To Mike's point, everybody on the front end is going to agree with you. The wholesaler that's selling you the house, yep, it's worth this all day long. The lender that's giving you the hard money loan and making money, yep, it's worth that all day long. That's not your hurdle. Your hurdle, like Mike said, is on the back end, because that appraiser is being hired by the bank as somebody to not just be independent, but to scrutinize the property and protect their financial investment, right? The bank wants to make sure that they're making a smart investment in this house. And so they're not fluffing the numbers. That's not the appraiser's job. And so I guess kind of, you know, thinking about, you know, when you're walking a property for the first time, being honest about those things that are functionally obsolete, being honest about, are you able to raise the floor in this enclosed garage? Are the ceilings high enough for you to do that, to make sure that this all feels like one level thing? It feels original to the house, taking out weird windows or weird exterior doors, right? Or, you know, just really trying to make the house all feel consistent in terms of the finish, the level that the house, you know, the level of the floor, the heights of the ceilings, all of those things are what are going to get you that kind of top dollar appraisal value when it comes time to sell. And if you cut corners and you don't do those things, like, don't be surprised when the appraiser is not giving you the value, right?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm going to finish up like on this. So one thing to know, and I do investor appraisals or consults all the time, is just because the property appraiser says it's 1,120 square feet does not mean it's 1,120 square feet. So I did one in South Tampa where the investor was from out of state. They'd never been to the property. It was supposed to be kind of easy. I looked on MLS. I looked on property appraiser. The gross living area matched. I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. So I get there. I measure it. Well, it was a 1,300 square foot house, and it was about 130 square feet off. So, you know, it came in 40,000 under contract price. And I explained to them that the backside of the house, like a 10 by 13 spot, was just a covered patio. It was not included in the house. There was also some functional obsolescence with like wall heights and enclosed porches and utility rooms. Do not trust this. Like, if you're buying a property, do your due diligence and bring a tape measure. And even if you just get a rough, like, throw a laser pointer in the house. Like, is it around 40? Is it around 26? Like, okay, if it's around 40 and it's around 26, then we're good. If it's not, and there's a question, well, maybe you need to hire someone to come out and measure the thing prior to just buying it, right? Public records is always off, especially on older houses. Even new construction homes, they're hundreds and hundreds of square feet off. And when you go to do your bank appraisal, they're going to measure it with a tape measure to the inch. That's what the ANSI standard is. So if you're off, you don't want to know when you're, have your hard money loan, you're paying interest, and you're going to close. And next thing you know, well, it's 200 square feet off, and we're not going to be able to close, right? That's really important. Doing your due diligence is really important. Another thing I would advise is, I'm on the Acela. So this is Acela, City of Tampa. This is how you look up open, complaints and how you look up permits. So I'm going to type in that address, and I want to see if there's any open cases or open permits. Some people maybe use this all the time, some may not. So you want to see that these code enforcements have been closed prior to buying. And I'm going to look as an appraiser and see, oh, okay, well, they actually did close out this plumbing trade permit and they did do a new hot water tank. You want to double check what whoever is telling you, what? Oh, yeah, the roof's new. Okay, well, did they pull a permit? Because if they didn't pull a permit on the roof, you're not going to get a good insurance policy, I'll tell you that. And you want to make sure you really take a look at this prior to buying any property in Tampa. Don't rely on the title people because the title people sometimes miss things. So this is Acela, Tampa. You just type in the address, any address you want, you can look up. It's all public record. And then last thing I'll do, Keely, is Zillow, if that's okay.
Sure.
So for those
pulling that up real quick, let me just say something and just kind of to protect yourselves. When you guys do your own permit search, but something important to know is that open permits are not a cloud on title. And so when you're buying property, you want to make sure that you request from the title company specifically that they do their own due diligence on the permits, because not all title companies do that. And if you buy something that has like old, open, random permits, it can be really difficult to close those. It can cause you problems when you go to resell the property. So just something to think about in terms of title, because I think a lot of people assume that the title company is going to pull permits and they don't. That's why it's important that you do this.
Yeah, they'll pull liens, but they won't pull the permit. So like this one, for instance, before I bought it, this was open for some reason. When they replaced all the water lines coming from, they never closed it. So the owner, before I bought it, had to call the city, pay some sort of fee, and they did an administrative close on it. So that way it wasn't on the property when I bought it. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You are protecting your own investment. Like as an appraiser, we're all about risk aversion. So don't rely on a wholesaler, don't rely on a realtor, don't rely on the owner, rely on yourself and really do your due diligence before you purchase these very large purchases. Last thing, if you don't have MLS, there is a way to comp out properties on Zillow. So basically you would go into anywhere you want to go, you'll click on sold, and then you could do a price range, bed bath counts, you could do exact matches or do ranges. Home type, I clicked houses because we're looking at houses, but you could do lots and lands and townhomes and all that. And then more is really important. That's where you put your year built, lot size, square footage, any of these items is important. You would apply those. Another big one for me is I only want to see 6 months as an appraiser. If I have to go 12 months, that's because there's probably no comps available. But we're in the city of Tampa. Typically, if you're over 6 months, you have to make a bunch of comments for bank loans on why did you go back so far. So you could do 90 days or 6 months. I even like to do 90 days to start and see, okay, what are we really looking at? And it'll show you, all the properties. And obviously you'll have to set up your own geographic area where you want it to pull from. The only thing is sometimes Zillow lags on data. So like it'll close in the MLS and it won't be on Zillow right away. So you might miss certain ones if like they just closed. So that's something to keep in mind.
I like 90 days too, because you have a renovation time, right? So you want to try to still have, if you're pulling comps that are 6 months out, by the time you finish your renovation, they're too old probably for the appraiser to use. So that could be a challenge.
And keep that in mind too, right? Like when you're doing appraisal on the front end, you might not be done with that renovation for 3 to 4 months. So the market, might slightly change in that 3 to 4 months, just depending on, obviously we have an election coming up. So things might change right around that election or after. So that's something to keep in mind. Your next 6 months is going to include an election. So that's really important, for the real estate market. Obviously Tampa is a little more resilient than most markets, but it could affect it in a short-term basis. So like right when you're coming to market, if there's a big issue, related to that or related to interest rates, that could certainly affect your sales price. Yeah, so I love this. I like Zillow. It's easy to use. And going back to the school district, like this includes on the bottom of every Zillow comp, your school district. So it tells you a pretty good amount of information, about it. It also shows the tax history. So like if a wholesaler sends you a deal, I like to look and then send them a screenshot like, okay, this just sold a month ago for this. Like, why are you listing it for this? Like, what's the deal? Kind of thing. So this is kind of like a quick synopsis if you do not have access to the MLS. Zillow is pretty good on that. But this was one of the comps that I utilized for, the appraisal we just did. And it's pretty easy to find them. Another thing, right? Like you could get rid of a lot of this stuff by just saying, like, I know this property's worth more than 400 and less than 550. So that'll narrow down the search quite a bit. And then you could kind of hone in on where you really are. Obviously, anything in this area selling under 3 is like either a fixer upper or some sort of issue with the property. And that's just because I know the market. But as you learn your market, you'll know high lows, and you'll know anything under 200,000, I'm putting a contract on it immediately. I don't really care what it's worth or what it looks like, because the land is worth 175, right? So as long as you understand those numbers as an investor and you get really comfortable in this zone, like this is my zone, this is where I buy, this is where I live, this is where my rentals are. So like I'm very comfortable here. If you'd ask me to like go over here and do the same thing, it would take me a day or so to look and really analyze the comps. But just get comfortable in your niche, and I think that will make you more confident as an investor.
So I know we're coming up on an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to stay on after the hour, and I'm going to deep dive into a couple of other things just from like the real estate agent perspective. But if you think you're done, then maybe we could open it up for a couple questions.
100% questions would be great.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask Mike before we hit that 1 hour, that 1 o'clock mark?
I'm going to stop sharing screen real quick. Yeah, feel free to ask, and I'm always open, to questions offline too, if you don't want to ask online.
Come on, guys.
I have a question. First of all, Mike, great information, really helpful for me. Earlier, we talked about kind of like the school districts being a major influence of value. And, that's obviously very objective, or generally pretty objective. How do you take into account like some of the more like soft influences of value? Like the map you showed earlier, there's some areas within like Riverside Heights, Seminole Heights that I feel are growing. You guys do business there. You guys are much more familiar, but you can sense that the value in the trajectory of the value is going up, but that's kind of like not objective, right? So as an appraiser, like how do you take into account like that trajectory that over time the value in that area is probably growing faster than other areas, but it's not so much like a hard fact, like objective, I guess.
Definitely. I think we would kind of look at it like in that area. So like, for instance, if I go back to sharing my screen, like if we're looking at Riverside Heights, I would put kind of like a map around Riverside Heights, and I would go back a year and I would run a market conditions report to see the growth year over year. So like, let's say Tampa's 5%, but Riverside Heights is 9%. Well, okay, I'm going to try to pull comps from that area only. So like I would go east of North Boulevard. I own a property west of North Boulevard. And if we go, I own a property east of North Boulevard. And if we go west of North Boulevard, the property prices are a lot larger. So when you're kind of going east, the property value does diminish a little bit as far as like high-end custom homes. So you want to run a market analysis. So like I just did a market analysis here, and like someone was looking to build like an ultra high-end $2 million house in this pocket, but it wasn't in the planned district, right? It was going to be 4,000 square feet, and it was almost an over improvement for the area. But we do take into account that this area is growing tremendously comparatively to like, other areas of Tampa that are growing, but they're, just growing slower. So yeah, we would try to prove what you're saying, Royce. We would try to prove that in a market conditions report. And then I have graphs that accompany the market conditions that could kind of show the trajectory. And if I had to pull a comp from outside that specific immediate area, I can make an adjustment for that, right? So, as far as growth goes over 12 months and make market condition adjustments. But a lot of those things are nuanced and maybe a little more subjective, right, than most. And you really need a deep dive into it to make it, an adjustment. Because when you make an adjustment, it really should be concrete in, the area and that this is what's impacting the value. So I think kind of investing is speculation, right? So investing is one thing, but appraising is supposed to be solid facts.
Gotcha. Okay. And then just a quick follow-up from an earlier point. Keely, so earlier you were mentioning how important it is to kind of influence like the appraiser that gets assigned.
Mhm.
I mean, from my experience, like if the buyer's lender assigns a appraiser, like you can't really do anything about it, right? Or have you seen different?
So I would say yes and no, right? So just speaking like, putting the real estate agent hat on, right? As a listing agent, when I list a property for an investor, my job, like a lot of, people think that they're listing agent, they just get photos done, they stick it in MLS. That's the easy part of the job, right? So then comes the negotiation, right? And then the final step is making sure that my client is able to get the price that they're asking for. So there is work that can go into that. So it starts with when an offer gets made, the buyer's agent is sending over a pre-approval letter and I'm able to see who the lender is. So I'm going to reach out to that lender directly and I want to know about the buyer. I want to make sure that they're well qualified. I want to make sure that their credit's already been pulled. I want to make sure that we're avoiding pitfalls with the buyer specifically. But I'm also wanting to get a feel for the lender themselves. Are they local to the area? Are they a mortgage broker from the area, or are they a big bank and the lender's like out in Tennessee, the loan officer is out in Tennessee? Ideally what we want is offers from buyers who are using their buyer's agent's preferred lender, because that's typically somebody that the buyer's agent has worked with, they know, they have a relationship with. It's typically somebody that's local to Tampa. And so there are ways to influence those things. A lot of that depends on how desirable your house is that you're selling. Like, again, this is something where if you put out a really great product, you're able to kind of demand certain things from the buyer's side. They're going to jump through some hoops to get their deal accepted. But kind of checking out who the lender is, reaching out to the lender directly. And yes, the lender can, Mike had mentioned like an AMC, or a appraisal management company. So they're essentially like a third party. And the purpose of this is to keep everybody neutral, right? They don't want a lender to assign directly to an appraiser who, is getting a little kickback if they appraise the properties the right way. This was kind of born out of the housing crisis that happened in the early 2000s. They put systems in place to make it very difficult to influence the appraiser. But lenders can definitely request that the appraiser be within a certain geographic area. They can request those things from the appraisal management company, because essentially the lender is using the same, they're throwing that appraisal management company business, right? And so that appraisal management company, while they can't specifically assign one appraiser that the lender has asked for by name, they can definitely reach out to only appraisers that live in Tampa and only ask those appraisers first, right? So yeah, there are ways to not, you can't like just go I couldn't like say, hey, Mr. Buyer, you're going to need to use Mike Scarpa for your appraisal. Otherwise, we're not going with your offer. But I can definitely try my best to make sure that the appraiser is somebody who's local to Tampa, simply by reaching out to the lender and asking them to request that specifically from the appraisal management company. So yeah, that's definitely a step that the listing agent can take.
Yeah, I would agree. And certain appraisal management companies have bad reputations for being bottom feeders or, setting, fees very low. And what happens is they'll give someone 6 appraisals in one day, for $250, $300. So how much time is that appraiser really spending on that? So asking those, who's your appraisal management company? Okay, then Google that appraisal management company, and then they have control over their panel, right? So, for instance, there's a local one called NAN here in Tampa. They're an appraisal management company. They have full control over their panel. So if they have appraisers that aren't, doing the right thing, or, turning in reports on time, or, sticking to this, you want to kind of find that appraisal management company that is a good blend, and go on Facebook and look in the forums. There's appraiser forums that say, don't use this AMC, don't use this. So you want to find a happy medium where the appraiser is getting paid enough to spend, time actually looking at your property for more than 10 minutes and really diving into the details. And then, the AMC is the checks and balances, right? So there's good ones out there. There's, some really terrible ones. And certain lenders use, those nationally recognized AMCs that realistically don't have control. They just kind of, the lowest bidder gets the price, so whatever it is, they'll send you whoever bid $250. So you want to try to control that aspect, like who's your lender, who's your broker? Are we going through UWM? Well, okay, UWM does direct to appraisers. It shouldn't be an issue, or talk to the broker. Like, are they confident that, they've had 10, 20 appraisals done in Seminole Heights? No issues. That's a good way to kind of, yeah, but you can't pick them. Unfortunately, no.
Yeah. I'll just give you a all too graphic real world example of this. We had a house in Seminole Heights that we were selling, and the appraiser was from Spring Hill, and it was an old man, and the house was on the Nebraska side. And the old man proceeded to lecture me in the property. I'm like dressed in all my little realtor garb with all my comps, like super excited. And this like 60-year-old man tells me how this is where he used to come. He doesn't understand why anybody would live off Nebraska, because this is where he used to come and get his hookers. And you're like, you are not the guy that I want appraising my property right now. So, it is, I will say, you can't really, I don't want to say there's like too much emphasis on being able to control the appraiser. And that's a rare situation that you get somebody like that. Like, I've only had a handful of appraisers that are that unprofessional or have that jaded of an opinion about an area. It only happens a handful of times, in all of the houses that I've been a part of, attending appraisals on. So it's not, it's definitely, this isn't like to scare everybody to think if you don't get the right appraiser, you're screwed. So much of it really comes down to your house and making sure that, you've properly evaluated it up front and you've done the things to make sure that you're able to get that ARV. And I mean, again, 98% of the time, you're going to get an appraiser that is a quality guy that's out there to do his job and doesn't have, weird jaded opinions about something or isn't from the area. That it's just a step that you can take to kind of help ensure the best outcome for your property, especially if you're pushing the price point and you're concerned that it might not appraise, right? It's like at that point, every little thing that you can do to your advantage, like go ahead and actively try to do that.
And it could be a woman as well.
Yes, it could be a woman. I actually like the woman appraisers better. They're more into like the, oh my God, this light fixture is so great. Here you go. I'm going to give you that extra 100K. I'd live here. Like, yes. Any other questions from anybody?
I have a quick question. I understand pulling the comps and evaluating it after the home is done. Is there anything that either of you personally do when you're scouting for a home or, for a flip? What are you doing personally to feel confident in predicting that ARV? Because like you said, there's a lot of moving variables in the election and, are other comps gonna come in or out? So is there anything that you would recommend just so that you feel comfortable in predicting that, like 5 months down the road?
Yeah, so I would say you want to find markets that are, stable and,
Right.
That like people already have moved to, like not as risky, right? So it's all about like assessing the risk of it. So like you also want to become very like super into that area that you're looking in. I think that people that are just buying property just to buy it because the numbers sound good is not really great. I think you should be like invested in that area. Once you get really, really comfortable with like, I know what this could sell for, and you watch it every night, like when I'm in bed, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking on Zillow, like what came up, what didn't come up, what's selling, and I always check back to what the sold was. So like you'll see a listing, but I want to know what it sold for 3-4 months from now. And I think once you figure out like, okay, I know these are going for high 4s to low 5s, and this just came up 20 minutes ago for 230, 225. This one I bought in Seminole Heights, like, well, that's a $200,000, $300,000 spread right there. I think I'm good. Like, I don't even need to really worry about much else. I think being comfortable there is really important when you're investing, like knowing the area, being comfortable and looking, for deals. Typically, in my personal opinion, if a wholesaler or you get it through an email or a text, like, 500 people have seen it already. If it's on Facebook, 500 people have seen it already. It's probably not the best deal, right? If you get it organically or you find it off market or you're the first one there to make the offer on a listed property that maybe the realtor doesn't know the area, I think those are your real like home run deals. You might get a single or a double from a wholesaler once in a while. But I don't know, Keely, correct me if I'm wrong. I know we kind of feel the same way, that if someone's emailed it out to 700 people and 700 people have already looked at it, and then and you make an offer on it and you get it, is it really a deal? I'm not sure, right? So you want to vet it because you're the one taking the risk. So I think that's really important. But I think just becoming super comfortable with an area, you know, whether it be a small area or a large area, is the first step forward in that.
I definitely agree with that. I think that like zeroing in on it doesn't have to just be one market. Like I have a couple of different neighborhoods that I follow and like feel like if a house comes up, I really don't even have to look at the comps. As soon as I see the house, I know that area well enough to know basically what the ARV is without really having to dig in. Now, if it's something that like we're thinking about pursuing, obviously we are going to dig into it and do our due diligence, but I'm able to very quickly skim through Zillow and see like, oh, this looks like a potential flip, or this looks like a good one. So becoming like, the more you can become an expert in one or two or three specific neighborhoods that you're interested in, the better you are at kind of mitigating that risk and having a realistic valuation of the property and not an optimistic valuation. In terms for me, in terms of like feeling confident in purchasing, a lot of it, I just come from a different perspective of the design, which I know we've talked about on other calls too. You know, I personally have seen time and time and time again where, you know, a unique, good quality design is another mitigator of risk. It's another thing that insulates you from risk and ensures that even if the market shifts a little bit, even if interest rates go up. So for example, we had a flip in Carrollwood that we were doing. We started it, and literally within like a week of us starting it, the interest rate started to climb over that summer. And so by the time that we were finished with the house, interest rates had gone from under 3% to like 7%. And the whole market had froze. Like literally nothing was selling for months. But our house still sold. We didn't make a ton of money on it like we had predicted, because we thought, oh, by the time we finish this, we're going to make an extra 40 grand over and above, and we're going to get multiple offers. It didn't end up being that way, but we still sold it at a time when nothing else was selling, and we still made money. We didn't lose money. And what that ultimately came down to was just that the buyers really loved the design. There's always going to be people that have to buy. And so for me, I feel that, you know, the design being good quality and being appealing to people is your number one thing for mitigating risk, and no matter where you buy. But, you know, a good neighborhood, a neighborhood that you're confident in, is going to continue to move forward. One of the cool things about us living in Tampa, guys, is that Tampa is like just starting out. So I feel like where other markets, you know, you have to be a little bit more concerned about that. I think the Tampa Bay area in general, when you look at what is coming in terms of like billion-dollar projects that are happening in Tampa, those people aren't investing that level of money unless they've done the research and they feel that the market can support it. So, you know, I feel like, you know, Tampa, we're probably going to continue to just increase, and we're naturally already a little bit insulated from risk right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? Mike, do you have a hard stop?
No, I'm good. I'm here.
Okay, just making sure. I want to make sure we're not. Sterling, you got a question? Oh, Khalil, what are you doing on his phone?
No, I've been it's like we're attached to the hip these days. No, so I've been here. What happened? No, and then I mean I know how we spoke of on the strengths of the Tampa Bay market and being kind of insulated, but what I've been doing just to make sure I'm not seeing like real market corrections is I've been trying to look up the agents that have these price drops to see how long they've been working. So a lot of it is just people won't accept, but the only market they know is 2021, 22, 23. You know what I mean? So some of the data that I'm seeing is kind of skewed, but some people are just wrong, and they're missing out on the fear of like inventory, like some stuff you used to get away with. Like now it's kind of sitting because people could be choosy. So while I see some market correcting, actually, I think the only market correction I've seen really here is the 33605 zip code, to be honest. like
I
33605, but
I definitely
the
think
rest of
that
my stuff has
that's a
just
good-
been inexperienced agents or new agents that just are pricing things wrong.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good point. I think that, you know, anytime there's a housing boom, you have a ton of agents that get licensed. But if that's the only market they know, as soon as it becomes a normal market, they're like freaking the hell out. They're like, why isn't this property sold within 3 days? And I agree with that. I think like there's a lot of agents that just took to price reductions and feeling like it just adds to the frenzy, really, when the truth is that a normal marketing time is, you know, 30 to 60 days, and a traditional market is a totally normal marketing time. Our interest rates are normal interest rates, you know, historically speaking. And so, yeah, I definitely agree. Those agents kind of hurt everybody when they do that, instead of kind of coaching their sellers through, hey, just be patient. Like, you know, we still have low inventory. We still have a ton of buyers moving here from other areas. Like, it'll sell. It's just, it's going to sell in a more normal marketing time.
And yes, so that was just a little tip of how to try to vet the agent. Now, if you see somebody like Keely, then that might be a market correction if it's a price drop, you know? So,
Don't look
but
at
yeah, if it,
I have one in Dana Shores that is like the bane of my existence. It's the longest listing I've ever held, just because they came on at the wrong time and it's not a renovated property. And so, yeah, no, it might not,
and
it might
sometimes it's
not be the best example right now.
sometimes it's the seller and the seller expectation. Because I know one of the ones that blew me was the 12th Street listing, and that's only because I keep a watch because we live right there. And you know, the new construction you had did,
Yeah.
and I with the double lip, I thought that was every bit worth of 760. So to see that one, I was like, huh?
Well, I didn't list that
But
one. I wasn't the listing
you
agent,
didn't list it.
and that wasn't
Yeah,
my.
I think I just watched. Okay, so even better, you designed it. But I'm like, Keely's stuff gets asking price. What's going on here?
No, I
But
designed it. I
715,
recommended a lower listing price to the builder on it.
you did. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was 765 at first, and then went for like 715 or 720.
And I told him that I felt like if they listed at 700, they would get multiple offers. So I told him
And it was
7.
still the highest. It was still the highest comp for that block. So
Yeah.
still good work.
Yeah.
Was
But
that
yeah,
the
that was
Norfolk
it. Good stuff.
farmhouses?
What's that?
Is that the farmhouses on Norfolk and 12th?
No, this one was it's, I mean, it was kind of like a forced
Louisiana.
look. It was like a bungalow looking house. It was on 12th, like further south, down by not Hemriola Park. Is it Hemriola?
You're not. I know how to do better.
Giddens Park, down by Giddens Park.
Yeah, 12th and it's kind of 12th and McBerry, but it sits between 12th McBerry and Caracas, so closer to Caracas.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that one wasn't my listing. So yeah, I hate when that happens, because I definitely do try to get them what I tell them they can get for it when I start designing it. So then when they go and list it, although that builder, I knew he wasn't listing with me from the jump. He had only hired me to design it because his partner is actually the realtor.
Okay. And I don't recommend it, and I think I kind of heard, but I was kind of moving around too. But I think another good point to make is what you just said. Like, I told them to list at 7. Listing sometimes at the right price can elicit multiple offers, but sometimes I'd be like, will the appraiser stick to that? Like, no, you said 700 and that's what you wanted, and you as the professional thought that, like, do you have to give them like, no, I'm setting at this price because I know that's what's going to elicit the traffic that's going to put me into a multiple offer situation?
So I'll let you address that first, Mike.
Yeah, so a good appraiser, you should really not even have to look at I mean, you're supposed to look at the contract, look at the listing, but realistically, your market value should be your market value. I know sometimes it's just easy to hit the number that's on the page, but that's not typically how it works. Even if it was listed, I mean, that's a great example. Like, you list it too high, you know, people don't even want to look at it. If you list it at the right price and you create urgency, it creates where you want it to go anyways, right? So I think that's the way to do it, especially in this like Tampa neighborhood. I don't think an appraiser is going to stick to it. I think that he'll see that you had multiple offers. If the data is there and supports the, let's say 715 versus the 7 that you offered, you put up, I think you'll be fine there.
So I'll give you like the real estate agent perspective, and Mike, you can feel free to tell me if I'm totally off base with my psychology of how I think appraisers operate. But essentially my strategy for dealing with appraisers is I send out, like, an appraiser reaches out to schedule the appraisal, and I respond immediately asking if I can have their email address so that I can share information. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a copy of the email that I send to the appraisers, and I'll post that in school for you guys. And so if you want to share it with, your listing agent, or if you guys are agents yourselves and listing your properties, I'll just post like a little template. But what my email essentially will tell them is, hey, here's all of the ages of the new major mechanicals that we've replaced. We've done all of the cosmetics of this house have been done, and I'll itemize that. Like if we've done things like all new drywall or all new insulation, like things behind the walls that they can't see, I'll also give them that information. If the property was fully permitted, I do note that. If it wasn't, I just don't say anything about it. But if it was, I do note that. What I'm trying to do is show like all these little things to show that I'm not like a crappy flipper, that we've done things the right way. I'll note in there that the property has never been occupied since the renovation was done. To Mike's point, we can't get that C1 condition rating, but all of these little things in the appraiser's mind, in my experience, are adding up to us being superior even to the renovated comps that are on the market, right? So what you're trying to do, like psychologically, is like plant all these little seeds as much as possible that work in your advantage. And then another thing that I will note is that the house had multiple offers on it, because I think that does show that the demand is there, right? A house is worth, realistically what a buyer is willing to pay for it if the buyer has cash. Right? But they don't have cash. They have to get a loan. And so they need an appraiser to also justify that price for them so that the bank will lend. But I think that helps gives the appraiser confidence if you're pushing that price point, letting them know that you did have multiple offers. Like, for example, the Thoroughbred house out in Odessa, the comps in that neighborhood were under 900,000. We were listed for 1,125,000. We went under contract for 1,145,000. Right? So we're like really scared that the house is not going to appraise. And so when I send that email out, I also meet with the appraiser if they're open to it, schedule at their convenience. I will not like tell them, no, you need to come at this time because that's when I'll be there. I just make myself available for whatever the hell time the appraiser wants to go there. And I meet on site. And then I also go over this very kind of gently in person. I'll reiterate all of these things. And I think that when you have a property that is pushing the price point, right? Like $900,000 comps, but we're asking for 1,145,000. Oh, but Mr. Appraiser, we had 5 offers on this house that were either at asking or above. That gives him a little bit more confidence to go outside of the neighborhood, to look at slightly newer vintage comps, right? Because he feels like, okay, if 5 realtors and 5 buyers all felt like this property was worth it, I got a little bit more confidence in stretching what I'm looking at as far as comps, right? Because in my experience, the appraiser is not trying to kill your deal. He's not going to give you a willy-nilly value on it just because you think it's worth that amount. But if you're able to show justification for why you think they can go a little further out, or and multiple offers, in my opinion, is one thing that I have found to be justification for them to feel confident to go a little bit further out or to expand their criteria, maybe a little bit more than they would be comfortable with. Let's say that we had started at 1.25 million and we had reduced down and landed at a buyer at 1,145,000, but they were the only buyer for it. The appraiser's not, A, they're going to think I was a greedy investor, and B, they're not going to feel as confident. But because we priced it right and we got multiple offers, we're giving that appraiser like, hey, we're not super greedy. We felt like we priced it right. The market showed that we did price it right, and multiple people were willing to pay this price. And so he went outside of the neighborhood. He used slightly newer vintage comps, and the house appraised for our purchase price. So that definitely is something I feel is worth bringing to the appraiser's attention. To Mike's point, like, does it really change the value? No, all of these things don't change the value. The quality of the house has to be there. The basics of the house have to be there. But what it does is they all add up to him feeling maybe a little bit more comfortable to go ahead and push the value.
Yeah, I think that all appraisal values, should be a range. That's not typically how it works. It's a dollar figure, but there is a range of value, right? On a good day, 1.1, 45. On a bad day, 1.1, right? There's not a huge difference there, but I think every appraisal has a range of value. An appraiser usually, weights his comps to kind of find the actual value. But like, for instance, that one we did today on Swanee, like on a really bad day, it's like 485. On a really great day, it's 520. My, opinion of value would probably be around 5, right? So if you give them the tools and the resources to show that, no, this should be at the top, then, we're not hitting a number. We're literally just, utilizing market data to come up with a value pretty much.
And I think there's a couple points to hit on that. Number one is, okay, so there's a range. You look at the property that, to your point, we have, what did you say, between 450 and 520?
485 to 520.
485 to 520. So when I'm looking at the property initially, like if I was buying this off of Mike, what I'm looking at are the 520 comps specifically. I want to see what is getting 520, and then I'm going to make this house slightly better than that so that I can ensure that when the time comes, the buyers are going to feel the property's worth the top end of the comps, but also the appraiser is not going to use those 480 comps. He's going to use those comps that are 5 to 550 because we have done a slightly better house than our best comp at 520, right? And so those are the things that you need to be looking at up front when you're in the acquisition phase of a property. What is it going to take for me to make this a $520,000 house, right? If a $520,000 house has a beautiful laundry room and 2 bathrooms and it's on a slightly bigger lot and it's slightly bigger in square footage, well, then you damn sure better have the 2 bathrooms, the beautiful laundry room, and knock the finishes out of the park to kind of compensate for the lot and the slightly larger square footage. So you're constantly like weighing, how does your property stack up against these other properties? And when you're looking at the top dollar properties, what do you need to have in your property and what do you need to do to be able to make sure that the appraiser is not even paying attention to those lower comps when the time comes, right? You're using the market data, but you're also figuring out like, how can you leverage those areas where the appraiser does have some discretion on the price, right? Because if it was all just about market data, the market would never go up. Like every house would be the same price for all of eternity. So it is the discretion, in my opinion, that creeps the market up, right? So what can you do to kind of creep your house up just a little bit above what the highest comp is, and then do that? And 99% of the time, if you did it the right way, you're going to get the value for it. Anybody else? All right, I think we're all good. I'm going to do like a little recap video because I think Mike pointed out some good resources, guys. So when you're evaluating a property, looking at the school zone of the property, looking at the permits, what's open, what's been done, confirming, because I can't tell you how many times investors buy a house where they say, oh, I was told it had a new roof, and there's no permit for that roof. It literally doesn't count. Or it has this or it has that, and then you find out that it doesn't have it. So the permit website and then the property appraiser website to confirm, how is the property appraiser viewing this property for things like garages, ADUs, making sure that those are legal structures on the property. And so there's definitely some resources to kind of a checklist, if you will, I guess, of places to check to make sure that, you're doing your due diligence. And then I think maybe on school lunch, maybe on Friday at our 12 o'clock, I'll dive in a little bit more to showing like using Zillow for those of you guys who don't have MLS. How can you best utilize Zillow to try to comp out these properties that you're considering? And yeah, I'll do the sample email that I typically send to the appraisers. and like just a little note about kind of my process for dealing with them. That way, hopefully it can help some of you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, well, thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate everybody who stayed on for the extra half hour or two. And Mike, thank you so much for doing this and giving us a little bit more of your time than I told you we would need from you. So I know you're busy, so thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank
All
you,
right,
guys.
well, if you guys need an independent appraisal, make sure you guys reach out to Mike, any sort of consulting, he does it all. So feel free to reach out to him. He's on Instagram as well. But you guys can always reach him through the community. So everybody have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys. Thank you.